Hello and welcome back to Muriel. In today's video I will give you an overview of all the steps involved in buying a property in France. So if this is something that interests you, then please keep watching. So once you found the property you would like to buy, the next step is to make an offer. An offer is done in writing and must include all the suspensive clauses such as subject to receiving finance or satisfactory structural survey. The offer then gets signed by yourself, the buyer, will get presented to the owner. Make sure to also include a date on your offer. Gets presented to the owner. Normally the first offer gets rejected, which I guess is part of any negotiation anywhere in the world. So make sure you don't put all of your cards on the table straight away. Once you've reached the level that has been agreed by the seller, your offer will then get countersigned by the seller and will become legally binding. Step number 2 is a notary. So once an offer has been accepted by the seller, you, the buyer, and the seller will each choose a notary. Usually in France, the seller and the buyer use the same notary. The notary in France is a public officer, so he is independent, so he's not really representing the buyer or the seller, and his legal obligation is to provide you with all the information about the property, make sure that he explains everything that you are signing in the document, and to make sure that you are buying a property with a clean title. Step number 3 is a preliminary contract. So the notary will collect all the necessary documentation to enable him to prepare the preliminary contract. In France, there are two types. There is compromis de vente or promesse de vente. I will do a separate video explaining these differences in detail. This takes normally anywhere between a few days to a week, sometimes more, just depending on how easy it is to pull all the documents together. And in this stage, the buyer can sign the preliminary contract in his private name with a substitution clause in the preliminary contract should you eventually want to buy the property in a company name, which can be done at a later stage. Step number 4 is deposit. Once the preliminary contract has been signed by both parties, you, the buyer, will need to transfer between 5 to 10% deposit into the escrow account of the notary. Step number 5 is the 10-day cooling off period. Now the 10-day cooling off period is only allocated to the buyer, so the seller doesn't have this perk. Within this 10-day period, if you change your mind, if you don't want to carry on with the purchase of the property, you can withdraw without even explaining why you do not wish to continue with the purchase, and you will be refunded 100% of the deposit that you would have transferred into the notary's account. Just make sure that if you do decide to pull out, this needs to be done in writing by an official letter addressed to the notary, and it needs to be sent by a special delivery and signed for delivery to the notary's office. Step number 6 is the conveyancing process. The period between the preliminary contract and the closing, in French acte de vente or acte authentique, is usually minimum 3 months, and this is due to some regulations in France, which I will explain in another video. During this time, the notary will prepare and collect all the outstanding documentations, will draw up the final deed, and you, the buyer, will need to organize transfer of funds into the notary's escrow account. If you are taking out finance, then this is the time for it to be processed, and once approved by the bank will transfer the money directly into the notary's account. If you wish to buy the property in a company name, then this is the perfect time for it to be set up. Step number 7 is completion, in French acte de vente or acte authentique. This is when we sign the final deed. The date for this is set in the preliminary contract, but can be adjusted in case there are any delays. So when the funds are in the notary's account and the notary has all the documentation ready and the final deed is drawn up, he will then invite the buyer and the seller into his office to sign the final deed. If for any reason the buyer or the seller cannot be present, then they can give power of attorney to a selected representative. The power of attorney in French is called procuration. So this person that you give procuration to can sign in your name. On this day, you will receive the keys, will be provided with the certificate of purchase, in French attestation, and the notary will take care of all the remaining registration formalities. Please note that in France, all the notary costs that already include the stamp duty are covered by the buyer. The percentage of this is 7%, so there is 7% on the amount of the purchase price that you will pay as the buyer. This 7% includes the notary fees, which represent about 0.82%. It includes the purchase or the stamp duty tax, which is about 5.89%, and it also includes VAT and all the other usual cost of usual paperwork. It doesn't take into consideration the cost of obtaining a mortgage or the cost of setting up a company. So I hope you found this video helpful, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to comment in comments below, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Thank you for watching.